Hey there, YouTube. This is your boy, Adam of Nola, and I am really excited to bring this video to you today. This comes from a content creator called Heliocentric, and the name of the video is How 5 Days on Mount Sinai Reaffirmed My Atheism. I don't want to give you a big preamble. This video I found to be incredibly powerful and a great platform for some great commentary. So let's dive into it and we'll make a few comments as we go along.
So some of you may know that I just got back from a very life-changing trip to Egypt. I got to spend 2 weeks out in the desert hanging out with Coptic Christians and exploring one of the most beautiful strands of Christianity that I've ever seen. And it was a really wonderful and magical time. Earlier this year.
So a quick note here, in case you have not seen any content from Heliocentric. First of all, I recommend his channel. Please go to his channel, watch this video because I'll be, of course, providing a link for it in the description. Also, look at the rest of his videos and subscribe if you're so inclined. But his main shtick, if you will, is that he often goes to all these different types of churches. He's gone to Pentecostal churches and Orthodox churches and, Jehovah's Witness churches and all this other stuff. And it's always like, well, an atheist goes to insert, this type of church. He does some other commentary and some other stuff, but that's his main thing. So while he is very much an atheist, he is also, I think, very open-minded. I think you have to be in order to do that type of a theme for all of your videos. And I find him to be incredibly earnest, and I think that's going to come through in spades in this video. And I think that his commentary here is so biting and so enlightening to the issues that I see with religion writ large.
Here, I had a gentleman reach out to me and shoot me an email, and they said, "Hey, Jared, I don't know you, and I've only watched a couple of your videos, but I think that you would gain a lot from a trip to Egypt." And he said that, he knows a very prestigious monk there in Egypt. And he said, I think that you should meet this guy, and I want to fund that entire trip. If you ever want to go, just let me know and I'll pay for the whole thing. And it didn't quite sound like a, Nigerian prince kind of scam. It sounded really sincere. But all the same, I was like, well, it's a really cool offer, but I'm not just going to drop everything and just randomly go to Egypt, especially without.
Quick side note, if any of my viewers would like to fund trips for me to go to Egypt or any place else, you make sure to hit me up. We can have a chat.
Anyone to guide me there. And then totally by happenstance, less than a month later, I had 2 Australian Christians hit me up. And they said, "Hey, Jared, we're Australian, but we're Coptic Christians. Egypt is our homeland, and we're going to go back home and make a proper pilgrimage. Would you like to come with us?" And I was like, wow, that's wild and, crazy timing and an insane coincidence, right? This wealthy donor who contacted me, he had a friend who is the head librarian at St. Catherine's Monastery. St. Catherine's Monastery is the oldest continually inhabited Christian monastery in the world. And what makes St. Catherine so fascinating to me is that it's a very important site with regards to biblical manuscripts. I love manuscript transmission and textual criticism. When I went to Wheaton, I wanted to become an ancient languages major because I wanted to study these ancient texts.
Also, a side note here, I like to point out for anyone who is possibly tempted to get the wrong impression of me, that as much as I like to talk about the Bible and the problems that I see in it, and as much as I have gained a level of knowledge about it that is certainly beyond a layman's level of knowledge, I also always want to make it perfectly clear that I am not a biblical scholar. I am not trained in any of this. I do not have degrees in any of this. I am just the average Joe. But I bring this up only to say that since I've started this channel, I have found textual criticism to be quite fascinating with regard to the Bible. And if my life had gone a different path, I mean, maybe I would actually be someone with real credentials behind me when talking about these things. And maybe in the future, I don't know, but I think that that ship has sailed. But I have real respect for the people like Kip Davis and Josh Bowen and Dan McClellan and Bart Ehrman and, on and on. These people who, they're not just throwing darts at Christianity or throwing darts at the Bible. They are learning deeply about how these texts were written and what the historical contexts were of the day. And all this to say that I can definitely empathize with what he's talking about with this type of fascination, because you don't have to be a Christian to have a certain fascination and appreciation for the biblical history, meaning the history of the Bible itself, and the whole incredibly complex story of how this came together and how it, of course, has impacted our society for good and for not good over thousands of years.
And so St. Catherine's is one of the epicenters of manuscript transmission. And it was also the place where we discovered Codex Sinaiticus, the oldest, most complete New Testament that we have ever found. And so this donor introduces me to this librarian monk, and we're emailing back and forth for several weeks, talking about manuscripts, talking about how much I love manuscripts. And I'm like sending him pictures of these, crappy little manuscript fragments that I write for some of my Patreon supporters. I give him the dates that I'm going to be there with my hosts, Diggy and Sarah. And he tells me like, all right, man, I'm sincerely looking forward to meeting you. And I can't wait to show you around the, hidden manuscripts library. And as if all of that wasn't enough, I have a friend, a good friend, who is a nun in Eastern Europe. Guess where she was going to be on October 29th? And it was like, God, what are you doing?
I love this. I love this, first of all, because he's an atheist. And as the title of his video says, this trip, and you're going to see why, essentially reaffirmed his atheism. But this guy, to me, I've never met him. I don't know what his personal life is like. But in terms of what he exudes on screen, he always seems very genuine. I think that this video, even more so than most of his videos, seems very genuine. And I love the fact that even an atheist, if they're being honest and genuine in their presentation, can admit that sometimes the stuff that Christians glom onto, sometimes it seems like it speaks to us. Sometimes it feels good to say, oh my gosh, look at all these things coming together. Look at all these coincidences. God, are you actually bringing all this stuff together? God, are you doing this stuff? Now, I'm going to take a little sidetrack here and let you know that when I was much younger, when there was no gray in my beard, when I was very much a pretty strong redhead, I, for a while, was introduced to and got into this whole new agey sidetrack that was sparked by a book called The Celestine Prophecy. You can look it up, or if you haven't heard of it, it was really quite the rage for a couple years. And man, at that point in my life, I ate up that shit hook, line, and sinker. And without giving you some long, boring breakdown of the book, it's just very new agey. It's not specifically a Christian text at all. In fact, if anything, some of it may seem anti-Christian. But what really appealed to me as this young, budding Christian who had already given my life to Christ was its constant reinforcement of the idea that there's no such thing as a coincidence. Here I am, young Adam. I wasn't Adam of Nola, hadn't even been to Nola at that point in my life. I was just young Adam, hadn't had a career, hadn't been in the Air Force, hadn't done anything. But like anyone who is a Christian and wants to remain a Christian, wants to feel connected to Christianity, to God, to Jesus, etc., I, of course, prayed. I went to church. I did the rituals, I observed the holidays. I tried to be a good little Christian. And I'm not going to say like any Christian, but like many Christians, I found the response, the cosmic response to be, well, underwhelming. Not that that was turning me away from Christianity. I knew all the talking points, like you can't demand a conversation with God, and God works in mysterious ways. And every time God closes a door, he opens a window, and all these different, trite responses. I mean, I was not in any type of crisis in terms of my faith at the time, but I was, even at the age of 17 or 18, wondering, like, when do you actually feel this stuff that other Christians say that they feel? When do you actually experience these things that many Christians claim to experience? Because I certainly was not experiencing them. And this book, The Celestine Prophecy, it really spoke to me, because you don't have to be into New Age stuff to glom onto this idea that there's no such thing as a coincidence. But this really drilled it into my head. And for a period of time, I'm going to say a couple years at least, it sparked this process where I started seeing meaning in everything. I started seeing everything being interconnected. I started seeing this tapestry of, like, there's no such thing as a coincidence. Oh, that person who talked to you randomly at the bar, there's a reason for that. And the woman that you bumped into at the supermarket, there's a reason for that. And the weird side conversation that you had with your manager that didn't seem to go along with your normal work duties, there's a reason for that. And the more you adopt that mindset, the more it becomes true. I don't mean that the universe really starts speaking to you. I don't mean that, wow, you actually have your eyes opened and everything is connected. I mean that the more you want it to be connected, the more that you want to believe that things are happening for a reason, that God has a hand in my life, well, the more that you insist on seeing that, the more you will see it. I can almost guarantee that you will see it if that's what you really want to see. That doesn't make it real. That just means that you'll see it. I mean, think of like things like pareidolia. I mean, if we sit there and watch, the old school static on TV, if we watch it for long enough and you stare hard enough, you'll see shapes. You'll see stuff in the noise. That doesn't mean that it's there. But that being said, I'm not trying to, right now get into this long discussion of how random events can't possibly be God, but I am telling you that whether you're a budding Christian like I was at the time, or whether you're an established atheist like he is now, it is, unfortunately, a very real human reaction and a human desire. I would almost say a human need to want to feel this connection to this deeper, mysterious other. And you're not going to see it as far as God speaking to you unless you're mentally ill. You're not going to see it as far as miracles happening in front of you unless you're mentally ill. But if you want to, you can look at the things happening around you and you can see providence. You can see everything coming together in this wonderful, magical way. And even for someone like him, who is an atheist and is at the end of this video still an atheist, it's very much something that's intoxicating. It draws you in. And I'll be honest with you, even to this day, when weird coincidences happen, it tends to make you go, wait, what? You're like, how did that all happen? And unfortunately, as this video is going to show, usually this isn't the hand of God. I mean, I don't think it's ever the hand of God now, but you know what I'm saying? There's, unfortunately, not as much kismet going on in the universe as we'd all like to believe.
All of this feels like it's being orchestrated together. And it's like, what are the odds? What are the astronomical odds? I have people willing to give me a free trip to the one monastery that I've always wanted to go to. And At that exact same time, my friend from Eastern Europe is going to be going to this one monastery out of the thousands of monasteries that exist in the world. And I'm going to get to see, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century manuscripts like up close and personal. And none of it happened. I never got to meet the head librarian. I never got to explore St. Catherine's, and I never got to meet my friend who is a nun. The story behind not getting to meet this librarian monk is super bizarre. I feel terrible for him. There's a very weird, very messy, very chaotic dispute underway at St. Catherine's Monastery right now. There's a dispute with the Egyptian government, and then there's also a dispute about who the new bishop should be. I think the Patriarch of Jerusalem has had to get involved. But suffice it to say, things are very messy and complicated, and I don't get it. And that librarian was not there. He had been sequestered to Athens. He and several other monks, I don't know if they were forced to leave and essentially kicked out of the monastery, or if they went of their own volition, but whatever the case, in the midst of this huge dispute, he wasn't there, which, isn't the end of the world. It was a bummer that I wasn't going to get to meet this guy that I had developed a friendship with through email. Either way, whether or not that priest was there, I was still going to go to St. Catherine's. I had already, had it on my itinerary.
I want to be very crystal clear about something before we continue on this video. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is just like, oh my gosh, it's the way that he relates this story. Kudos to him for being as open and as honest as he is with his audience, because I think that his sincerity and his intentions come across in spades. But that being said, I want to make it very clear that if you think that everything is coming together and it's the hand of God and everything is being worked in your favor because this is what God wants in your life, and then it all falls apart, that in no way disproves God. I get that. Conversely, if every magical coincidence that materializes in your life truly somehow works to your benefit and makes everything better, and it feels like God's working with you, that in no way proves God. I mean, there is no anecdotal story that you can give me of the kismet, the magic coincidences in someone's life coming together that will prove or disprove God. I understand that. But I think that his story is very important and it's very instructive, because this shows how all of us, to some degree, even an avowed atheist like him, can at times be subject to and even gullible enough at times. I hate that word because it makes him sound like a doofus, and he's not, but gullible enough to allow ourselves to get swept up into this way of thinking. And this is exactly why so many Christians that I know swear to you that God works in their life every single day, because they were late for work and then the neighbor came by and said, hey, do you need a ride? And got them there, in the nick of time. Or they were sick and then somebody who they don't even know mentioned a cure to them that they had never heard of, and they took the cure and it worked. And it all feels like the hand of God in your life. And I'm not here to tell you that it's not. I mean, I guess, yeah, I am. But I mean, I can't prove anything, right? Neither can you. I can't prove that there's not a magic sky daddy pulling the strings and doing everything in your favor or your benefit. If you want to believe that, that's fine. But the simple cognitive, they're not simple, but the basic cognitive processes that all humans are susceptible to are those same processes that so often feed this religious sense of fervor and awe.
So I'm getting closer and closer to actually going and exploring the monastery. And then my nun friend reaches out and lets me know that she's sick, really sick, and she is restrained to a hospital. And so, there are some parts of the trip that aren't going quite as according to plan. But I still went to Mount Sinai. I still went to St. Catherine's. I walked around the monastery for 4 days trying to find a monk that I could talk to, trying to find somebody that I could speak with about, possibly seeing the Manuscripts library in the wake of this librarian that had become friends with. And I wandered around the monastery for 4 days, and I never found a monk. I never found a single person that I could talk to. And when I shot my friend, the librarian monk, an email, he told me that he wasn't able to help me. St. Catherine's is a beautiful and stunning monastery, and it's open to the public. It's open to tourists and pilgrims. But the actual portion that's open is pretty small. It's about a single alleyway with a view into one of the chapels. Beyond that, there's a gift shop and a small museum. But, you have to kind of know somebody to get the full experience of it. And at this time, I was coming down with a pretty bad cold. And so, it was just me disoriented, sniffling and snotty, wandering through the desert heat, trying to look for somebody who spoke just enough English to point me in the direction of one of the monks there. And nobody could. The last day that we were there, my guides, Diggy and Sarah, they came and we got reunited because I had specifically requested like a few days to be by myself at Sinai. And so, for the first 3 days I was there by myself, and then the last day and a half or two, they came and were with me. And so Diggy, Deacon Ignatius, he comes with me and Sarah into the monastery, and I tell him, like, yeah, man, I've been wandering around for 3 days and I have not been able to find a single monk to talk to. They're not having it. And so they come with me, and they're asking around in Arabic trying to find somebody. And we were told that, hey, probably not going to be able to talk to any of the monks. At least go to Vespers. And that felt like a, nice consolation prize. Yeah, just at least go and see one of the cool chapels and pray Vespers in there with a whole bunch of devout Christians.
I just want to note here that clearly this guy has an appreciation for religion and culture, atheist though he may be, because, a lot of atheists wouldn't even want to go on a trip like this or do these types of sightseeing type of events. But clearly he was very interested in this. And even though everything's going horribly wrong, he's like, yeah, maybe I can go to Vespers. And for me personally, like, do I want to go to Vespers on a regular, day here in the US? Hell no. But I do understand that if you have traveled this far and you are interested in things like biblical textual analysis, and you are at this historic church at a historic location, regardless of what you think of the theology, it's a historic location. Of course, you should want to experience things. Of course, you should want to, as much as is possible, see and feel and participate in the rituals and understand how it is other people think and other people believe and other people live, even if it's not your way of thinking. So I love the fact that he is so open-minded and that he is so open to experiences, and he is the antithesis of what is so often caricatured as, the brooding, angry atheist. It's just like, screw all you Christians and screw anyone who's religious and screw your gods and screw everyone, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go off and read Atlas Shrugged and jerk off, while I do meth or something. Like, there are people out there like him who don't believe any of your things. They don't believe any of your truth claims or your assertions, but they still deeply feel and are interested in understanding and learning truth in, that generic cosmic sense. And they have respect for cultures. And you don't have to be a theist in order to have that respect. In fact, I would argue some of the more respectful people that I've ever met with regard to other cultures are not theists.
And so we walk to that chapel and we are stood up at the door. And the gentleman guarding the door says, well, I'm sorry, but you're Coptic. You're not Eastern. You're not allowed in. I should have mentioned that. So St. Catherine's Monastery, it's got a very bizarre history, but it's actually not a Coptic monastery. It is a Greek Orthodox monastery. So they're Eastern Orthodox rather than Oriental Orthodox. Diggy, my host through this whole thing, he is Coptic. He is Oriental Orthodox.
I have to interject here and say that on one hand, I do understand that any group has the right within legal frameworks and within reason to define their boundaries and say, hey, this is a place for our group. This is a ceremony for our group. And there's nothing inherently wrong with saying we don't want people outside of the group at certain ceremonies or in certain places. There are exceptions to this, like the no blacks in the golf club kind of thing. There are some things that can be pretty gross. But generally speaking, I don't have a problem with people saying this is our space. But dude, nobody could have informed him on this sooner. It just feels so rude. And it feels, I can't point this as some lesson against Christianity, but it just feels so indicative of the seemingly endless fractionalization that we see amongst Christians all over the world, not just in the US. And it's so sad that he had to run up against this firsthand. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward.
And so when we tried to go inside, they said, hey, we're sorry, but you're not an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And if you wanted to pray Vespers here, you should have talked to one of the monks beforehand. And when we tried to reason with him and say, my guy, I've been wandering around this monastery for 4 days trying to find a monk to talk to about this whole thing, he was unmoved. And when I told him about the librarian monk that I've been talking to for months, he said, well, that monk isn't here. It's been a long time since I've felt a cosmic rug pull like this. I'm criticizing providence, or maybe the idea of it. Now, hear me out. Had all of this gone according to plan, I still would not believe in providence or predestination or divine coordination, but I would have taken all of that and said, all right, I'm humble enough to say, point made. I don't believe that it's God. I don't believe that it's the universe trying to tell me something, but fair enough. It looks pretty cool. I still would have believed in the stochastic, random nature of the universe. But had it all gone according to plan, I would have felt the tug of providence. And I would have, maybe slipped into smiling about it and letting myself get caught up in the mystery and who cares? It's beautiful, and maybe there's something going on here that I'm too stupid to understand. And had it all gone according to plan, if you would have pressed me on it, I probably would have said, cognitively, I don't believe in providence, I don't believe in fate, but I feel it today. And now, here being on the other side of that, I have the misfortune of feeling what I know to be true.
I want to be really clear here that for all the years that I was a Christian, this story would have meant next to nothing to me. Because while I find incredible value in his story now, and I'm not saying I wouldn't have liked this story before, I wouldn't have found any compelling case for or against my God. Like I've already said, if all of this stuff had come together, that's not any proof of your God. And the fact that it all blew apart is not any proof against your God. Those things are disconnected. And as a Christian, I would have totally seized onto that. And I would have probably said in a fairly dismissive way, who fucking cares? What's your point? The guy had a trip. He thought things were coming together cosmically. And it turns out that because the real world is messy and because people are assholes and because geopolitics affect all of us, the shit didn't go down. And what does that have to do with my God? What does that have to do with my religion? And I would have been on any empirical level correct. It is completely correct for any Christian to view this video from him and say, what does this have to do with my God? Or what does this have to do with my religion? And on a very deep level, it doesn't have anything to do with your religion. But I would argue now, while this doesn't say anything specifically about the truth or not truth of Christianity or any other religion or theism in general, what this does do is it illustrates in a painfully clear and personal way how we as humans, as these little meat puppets running around the planet with our big brains that we're so proud of, we are still subject, even atheists, even the most staunch skeptic or scientist or critic or whatever, we're all subject sometimes to seeing that weird connection of things that don't seem random and going, wait, what? And then once we see it, the human brain is such that it wants to attach meaning to things. Maybe I have too much of an empirical, cold-hearted view on this because amongst many of the things that I do, I'm a gambler. I play high-stakes poker. And I know from thousands of hours at poker tables that because you got pocket aces this hand doesn't mean that you can't get pocket aces the next hand. And sometimes you can go through crazy runs where you have 5 hands in a row where you get pocket aces. And even the other people at the table are looking at you like, dude, are you cheating? Do you have like one, up your sleeve or something? But these things happen. And it doesn't mean that God was looking over me, trying to make me a winner at the poker table today. And it doesn't mean that the spirits were aligned and they wanted me to enrich myself at the expense of the other players. It just means that sometimes you get fucking lucky. Sometimes everything comes together in ways that just feel odd. And often, many other times, they don't. And neither of those scenarios, the positive or the negative, are any type of indicator or proof against God. They're just life.
I feel the fragility of life and everything in it. And I can't really explain the sense that I had, the feeling of like this trap door falling out from underneath you. It's like, that you know how this story has to go. Like it's the buildup, the tension, like all of it, it's got to be there. And then you're stood up at the door and your friend is sick in a hospital. The monk that you were going to hang out with is sequestered to Athens. And then you come crashing back to reality and you're reminded of the fact that there isn't fate. The magic isn't there. And so many times it just feels like you know how this story has to go. You know that there might be bumps in the road or things might not go as they seem, but ultimately it's going to pan out. It's going to turn out right. I think we all have this sense of immortality of like, oh man, I can't die yet. I can't die in a Egyptian car crash because this mission hasn't been accomplished yet. This fateful story is in progress and it's too big to fail. It's nothing can stop this from happening. But as I was just laying there on that bed, I just realized that I could die. The universe doesn't owe me anything, and there's no guarantee that I have to make it out. I'm not just talking about, crappy things happening. I'm talking about the sense that, the universe is pulling you in a certain direction, or God is leading you to do something. And then it all falls apart. And you have to wonder, well, was this or that thing providence, or did I misunderstand it, or did God change his mind, or did our prayers avert the terrible outcome, or did the devil get the upper hand in this scenario and he thwarted the whole thing? Does this man or his father have some hidden sin that prevented this whole thing from...
I want to point out here that his conjectures here about, what are the reasons that this thing didn't pan out, and all of the ways that theists and non-theists would talk through it, they really highlight the way that Christians, or theists in general, but Christians specifically, will create narratives that are can't fail narratives. They have completely insulated themselves from any type of problem with a story like this. Because, like I said, when I was a Christian, I would have heard this story and thought, yeah, that sucks that you had a bad trip. What does it have to do with anything? Bad things happen. God doesn't fix everything for you. God doesn't answer all of your prayers. God doesn't make everything come together for you. That doesn't mean that my God doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that my religion is bullshit. So I do understand that in any religious system, I don't think it's possible to have a functioning religious system that does not account for the effery of day-to-day life. Because if your religious system tries to say that the effery of day-to-day life does not happen, pretty soon you will have no people following your religious system, because they will realize that in their life, effery is still a thing. But the flip side of this is that it becomes the type of story that Christians feel like they can't lose with. Meaning, if everything had gone according to plan, the way he felt it was when his trip was coming together, of course, Christians would have flooded into his comments, and they all would have been there saying, see, that's the hand of God working in your life. See, that's providence working on your behalf. See, God wants to have a relationship with you. See, God is working on behalf of all of us. I mean, everything good that could have happened in this trip would have been, in the Christian mind, evidence for their God and their religion. And yet, when everything goes to shit, when all of the expected outcomes blow apart, they will at the same time wash their hands of it. And they'll just be like, hey, what do you want me to do? Bad stuff happens. God doesn't, orchestrate everything the way you want it to be. It's not my fault. It's not God's fault. It's not Christianity's fault. It's not anyone's fault. And of course, they wouldn't be wrong. But the point is that they have set up scenarios like this to perfectly have it both ways. If this trip had gone the way that he thought it was about to go, then there would be so many Christians just dying to jump on that bandwagon and say, see, we have a great God, a big God, a loving God who wants you to come into fellowship with him, and he wants to have a relationship with you. And now that it all went to shit, they're going to be like, well, sorry, dude. Shit happens.
Panning out like you thought it was going to. And the reality is that We are good storytellers. And in the midst of tragedy or disappointment, we'll come up with a story to soothe the pain. Because we're human, and we see faces and clouds, and we see our futures and tea leaves, and we have to make sense of the chaos around us. And I know that every Christian who's watching this is, coming up with some story about how this all makes sense and how God is playing chess while we're playing checkers. I'll listen to earnest Christians tell me about how they think, this happened so that this other thing could happen. And well, this fell through because, God knew in his foreknowledge that this other thing was going to happen. And they'll tell me how they think it makes sense. And I just nod my head because I'm too polite to tell them that I think it's bullshit.
Bingo. Bingo. I mean, if you want to see this meaning in everything around you, then by all means, go nuts. But there is no empirical reason or logical reason whatsoever to think that it's anything other than you stitching together the little moments of happenstance that you feel are important to you.
And I'll see these people come up with a story about how it was God's time or God's providence that this or that catastrophe happened. And I feel nothing but compassion for those people, because I think that the harder truth to accept is that there is no story being told.
This is perhaps the only time in this entire video at which I'm going to pretty firmly disagree with him. I do understand that for many people, they feel like it is a horrible conclusion to come to believe that there is no story being told. And we are creatures who always want to have some type of explanatory story. No matter how crazy the event, no matter how inexplainable it is, we still want to have a story that explains exactly why it happened the way that it did, especially when it happened in a way that was horrific or blew up in our face or just everything fell apart. And while I do understand that very basic human instinct, and I do understand that most humans stick to that, this is one area where, for me, being an atheist has become absolutely freeing. I mean this sincerely. I mean this 100%. Being an atheist has taken so much off of my chest, because when I was a theist and shit seemed to crumble, especially when I thought it was all coming together and then it still crumbled, I found myself, like so many other theists, reaching for what was the answer. Did I piss off God? Did I not live my life properly? Did I not, do the proper rituals or say the proper prayers? Or is it part of God's plan that this had to go shitty for me today? Maybe it went shitty for me because this is somehow furthering God's kingdom. I mean, you can go nuts wrapping your head into the most exquisite knots trying to figure out why this bad thing happened to me. And one of the most freeing things for me has been to understand that there isn't a reason. There's not a God up there pulling the strings, and I don't have to figure out why he made the bad thing happen to me. I just have to accept the fact that this is my reality now. And going forward, I need to do the best I can to afford for myself and my family and my loved ones, given the reality that I'm in now. And once you accept that, oh my God, is it freeing? Yes, I said, oh my God. So all of you snarky people put that in the comments about how I still believe in God or something. But oh my God, is it freeing? It's so freeing. And I'm not saying that it's a magical cure to remove you from grief or, unhappiness. I mean, like when my grandparents died, I spent years in a kind of funk about it. I mean, it didn't ruin my life, but It was constantly hanging over me, and it was very sad. And when other people around me die or have horrible life circumstances, of course, it's going to drag me down. But it doesn't drag me down nearly as much as if I had to sit there and try to work out in my little monkey brain how I deserved this, or how this fits into God's plan, or how an all-loving, omnibenevolent God could allow this to happen to me. Because when you take on that burden, I feel that Christianity and theism in general gets to be stifling, suffocating. It becomes almost unlivable if you have to deal with tragedy. And I know that Christians will want to believe, well, because I'm a Christian, I won't deal with some of these tragedies, but everyone experiences tragedy in some form, some way along your path of life. You will experience tragedies. And it's not a matter of I love God, therefore the tragedies won't happen. And I know that when they're not facing a tragedy, Christians will tell you, well, it's my faith in God that gets me through the tragedies. But I've seen them time and time and time again, when they face the tragedies, they so often allow themselves to devolve in this mindset that says, why me? How is it that despite my faith, despite doing all the things I was supposed to do, how is it that in your all-loving plan, this bad thing happened? And when you remove that, when you unplug it and you remove any power that it had in your life, suddenly it feels so freeing, because you see a tragedy. Someone that you love got run over by a bus and they're dead. And that's going to make you very, very sad for a long time. And it should. But it's just the sadness that comes with, wow, some random bad shit happened in my life. You don't have to try to figure out, did I piss off God? Am I doing something wrong in my life? Or even worse, did my loved one getting run over by a bus somehow factor into God's plan? I mean, that will rip your mind into shreds. So while I love everything about this video from this creator, Heliocentric, this is the one area where I would say, and I understand he's in the thick of it. He's dealing with the thoughts and the emotions of this trip that did not go as he wanted it to. But I would say, dude, that is the exact reason why I love atheism.
We're just damn good storytellers. Ultimately, I need to pause here and say that this entire trip was not a flop. Egypt was wonderful and incredible. And I had a life-changing trip there. And I felt myself fall in love with Christianity all over again. But when it came to the thing that was candidly the whole purpose of the trip, it just fell apart, man. Now, I can already hear the condescending voice of, some asshole who says something like, oh man, some plans didn't pan out, therefore Jared's pissed at God and that's why he's an atheist. And that's not what I'm getting at, man. It's this sense of we feel like we know what's going on behind the curtain. These little times where people feel like the Holy Spirit led them to this or that. Oh, this was such a God thing. He led us to buy this house or move to this city. He showed us the perfect school to put our kids in, or he gave us these new best friends to keep us company here. And then when the job falls through, or the house gets swept away by a mudslide, or the school that you thought God was leading you to gets shot up by a madman, you have to second guess what you thought fate was. I want to speak maybe a little bit more candidly than I usually do. I know the vibe that I give off, and people often think that I'm like, this close from reconverting. And I don't know how to say that I'm not. I never was. People think that I do atheist church audit because deep down I hope that it's true, or because I'm hoping for just the right song or the right sermon to bring me back to Jesus. And I don't see it that way. I feel like I'm able to do what I do because I'm so thoroughly convinced that it's not true. There was something that I read in one of my journals a while back, and it was something to the effect of, I've studied Christianity enough to know that I believe that it's bullshit.
I love that. I really love that. When I started this channel, which now was, I don't know, 7 months ago, something like that, I was pretty hardcore, strong atheist. But man, my level of atheism, if there's a scale of like 0 atheists to 10 atheists, I'm at like a 13 now. And it's not because I'm bitter or entrenched, but it's because the more I study about it, the more it just feels like complete and utter bullshit. And of course, I thought it was bullshit before. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been an atheist. But I was more along those lines a year or 2 or 3 ago, where I'm like, well, it's bullshit, but I don't care, right? It's just like, it's like flat earthers. I get it. You're idiots, and I don't want to waste any time with you. But then if you have to get in and study flat eartherism, and you have to study the people, like, you're probably going to come out of that with a renewed sense of F you about all of it, because the more you dive into their ridiculousness and their delusions, it's probably going to make you dislike them even more. Now, I don't dislike Christians in general. I don't even dislike Christianity in general. But I do think that the entire theological underpinnings are absolute, complete shite.
But not so much as to lose the sense of reverence that I feel for it. And I see that reverence everywhere. I see it in the monks, and I see it in the priests, and I see that hope that is able to give meaning to the noise. And I respect the hell out of it.
I love the fact that he says, but I see that reverence, and he respects the hell out of it. I had, of course, many Christian friends in my life. There was a person I knew about 15 years ago. He wasn't a friend, but a really good work acquaintance. And he was a very deep kind of theological guy, Anglican, I believe, in terms of his Christianity. But he is also a very practical individual, very kind of deep, wise person. And he said, ultimately, all religion is just people searching for wisdom. And that part of religion, I can absolutely respect. I can respect anyone who's diving into their Quran or their Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas or anything else, who's looking for wisdom and trying to parse through these deeper mysteries of life and how they can apply this to their own life. I can respect that. I do respect that. And I think that it is healthy to always maintain that respect. It's just some of the specific ideas of Christianity that at times made me go, what the fuck, dude?
And I admire it. And I respect the people who are able to construct these stories about how, there's meaning and purpose and silver linings and hope in the ashes. But I think that's just because we're too uncomfortable with the noise. There were certain parts of the Egypt trip that were hard. Early on in our trek, we went to El Muharraq Monastery, which allegedly is, the monastery that sits on top of the holy site where the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, fled to Egypt under the rule of King Herod. The problem is, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus never went to Egypt. Scholars are very confident that the flight to Egypt and the edict to kill all the young baby boys, none of that happened.
I love this because he's going to talk about this church, and it's one thing to have holy relics or holy places, but when you finally open your eyes and you realize that some of these things just literally never happened, it doesn't mean that you can't still have holy places, but you start to see through the facade of how these places came to be and how they were named as holy and how there were traditions built up over hundreds or even thousands of years based on air. Jesus never went to Egypt. And I know it's going to piss some Christians off. I don't care. I'm not a mythicist. I've never contended that the historical Jesus did not walk the earth. I believe that he did, as most biblical scholars do. But he didn't go to Egypt, and there was no slaughter of the innocents. Herod did not kill all the babies. That was all created to try to fulfill more quote unquote prophecies that the writers of some of the gospels saw when they were writing those gospels and trying to connect the pieces.
That was a theological invention of Matthew in his gospel. It only is mentioned in Matthew. It's not mentioned in Mark, Luke, or John. And the reason why he invented it is because he's trying to showcase Christ as the new Israel. And something about that felt really unsettling to me, where this wasn't just a site where an alleged miracle happened, but the site itself was bullshit. Like, nothing ever happened here. There was a story in Matthew's gospel about this thing happening, and then once upon a time, some dude said, oh, it was probably this cave. And the rumors and legends started accumulating traction, and then eventually a monastery was built on the rumor.
I just want to point out quickly that this is the type of stuff that Christians will swear confirms the biblical history. They'll swear that we know where the church is in Egypt that Jesus and his parents fled to. No, you know where the church is in Egypt, where they built this tradition over centuries of saying that this is where he fled to. And I'm not saying that nothing in the Bible is historically accurate, but a huge percentage of it, especially with regard to like these birth narratives and growth narratives around Jesus, are just made up in order to try to further a narrative that the gospel writers were trying to further at the time. So I'm going to stop it here. At the rest of the video, he talks about how he climbed Mount Sinai, which is something that you can do as a tourist there. It's a one-day hike. It's not a mountain in the respect of like Mount Rainier or Mount Everest or something like that. But it's a really good story. He ends it on a beautiful note. And I'm not trying to steal his whole video here. I'm telling you, without me blathering on, go click the link in my description and watch his video from start to finish without all my stupid commentary, and subscribe to him as well. I just think I respect this content creator, but I really respect this video in the way that he's put this together. And I think it takes a lot to put this out there on camera. I think it especially takes a lot when you're an atheist, because there's so much here that an opportunistic theist could pick at and use against him, or, you know, just use to further their own narrative. And clearly he doesn't let that denigrate the quality or the veracity of his own story. And I have a ton of respect for him for that. I really wanted to share this with you today. I sound corny, but I'm going to say it moved me. You know, I really empathized with this. And I think that maybe some of you probably have empathized with it as well. Not just the story, but the fact that he's obviously telling a very heartfelt rendition of what's happened to him. And he's parsing it in very honest terms. And again, that deserves incredible respect. Thank you for joining me here on another episode of Breakdowns and Beatdowns. I want to always give special thanks to our members. You guys are giving me life. Thank you so much. I appreciate every one of you. If you guys think that I've screwed up or misrepresented Heliocentric or said stupid things, I'm sure you're going to leave them in the comments, aren't you? So please like and subscribe, do all the things. You know, I'm going to stop saying that soon because it's so lame. Like, you're going to like and subscribe if you want to. You're going to comment if you want to. I think I'm done with trying to prod people for that shit. But thank you for being here. I hope to see you all on all of my future videos. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.